Welcome back from the ad break. Let's carry on with our lesson. Okay, so what we're going to look at now is we're going to have a look at the evidence that there is for evolution. Okay, so we're going to now look at the various forms that we have. And if we have a look here, the first thing we're going to have a look at is the fossil record. And remember, you have covered and you did learn how fossils were formed. And what we do is we go and have a look and we find that fossils are found in different layers of rock. Okay, so and if you remember, we have stratified rock. So it means that there are various layers. And obviously the oldest, so we might find a fossil here, some kind of fossil organism. And then we'd find something else here, and something else here. So we find various fossils in the various layers. And remember, because what happens when fossils are formed, there's layers of sand or sediment that are deposited on top of the organism's body. So then this layer here would obviously be the oldest. Whereas this one over here would be the youngest. Okay, and then so as we go deeper down and the deeper we go, the older the fossils we find in the deeper layers. Okay, and that's how then we would date them and then determine how old they actually are. All right, so it's different fossils that are found in different rock layers. Okay, that's the fossil record. And we said the oldest fossils usually are in the oldest or the lowest or further down down in the earth. Those are the oldest rock layers, and therefore we usually say that those fossils then are older than the ones that we would find. And very often we also find transitional fossils. So we might find that between these fossils and these fossils in this layer, there was another layer of fossils that are transitional. So those transitional fossils, they would have some characteristics that are common with the fossils found in the oldest layer, as well as other characteristics that may be common with fossils that are found in a later layer. All right, so that is the fossil record. Here we see a diagram. We see where an excavation where a fossil is emerging out of the rock layer, and it actually becomes quite an intense and quite a complicated process to actually get the fossil out of the rock, because you don't want to damage the bones. And remember, it's just the bones usually that have become fossilized, and so when archaeologists work on the fossil record, they work very carefully and with very fine tools to actually then let the fossil emerge out of the rock. Because remember, it is in rock, it's not in soil. These have then been fossilized in rock, so it becomes quite difficult. All right, so the fossil record shows us, this is what it does show us. It shows a systematic change. As I said on the previous slide where I showed you the different layers of fossils, it's a systematic change that has taken place through time. Okay, so it didn't just happen. It can take up to 10,000 years before the earliest that something starts to become fossilized is about 10,000 years. And so it's a systematic change that has taken place through time and is termed descent, which we said is when you descend from something else with modification. Okay, so when we look at the fossil record, we can see there are changes in the body structure of organisms. And that modification we mentioned earlier, we said, was due to genetic changes. All right, then the evidence, what the evidence does show us, it shows characteristics, okay, that make organisms similar to one another. And that is where we spoke about the transitional fossil. So we can have a look at various layers of fossils through the time periods, and we can see, did a layer above a lower layer, did those organisms evolve from? Did they descend, or were they descendants of the fossils that were in the layer below that? All right, and that's all of that information we can then gather from the study of fossils. So they are a very important part of our record of evolution as it has taken place. All right, so we're going to have a look at another form of evidence called biogeography. And earlier when we were talking about the term, we said we're looking at living organisms, which is bio, and geography is where they are in the world. All right, so biogeography then is the study of where species, so it's the study of where species are found and why they are found there. All right, so if we have a look, there's many plants and animals that we have a look at in the world, in regions that are similar. Okay, so of the same line of latitude, similar climates and conditions, and that then suggests that possibly these organisms share a common ancestor. All right, so let's have a look at the diagram over here, and in fact on the next slide we've got it a little bit larger, and this is one example of our large, basically flightless birds that you can see on different continents. Okay, so we are very familiar with the ostrich. We find that in South Africa. There's the cassowary, which we find in Papua New Guinea. The kiwi, which the New Zealanders are known for, is their kiwi. We call them kiwis. In Australia, we find the emu, and in South America, we find the rhea. Now, if we have a look at all of these birds, we can see that there are similarities. You know, they have some characteristics in common. However, they are found in regions that have huge distances between them. The rhea is found in South America, the ostrich in Africa, the emu in Australia, the kiwi in New Zealand, and the cassowary is in Papua New Guinea. And what we know about these birds is that they're flightless. So they couldn't have flown these distances to the different regions that we find them in today. So when we have a look at this, we see that there are characteristics in common. So we assume that they have come from a common ancestor, which then means that they must have emerged or evolved from that common ancestor in a particular region. So this then gives us an idea that perhaps these continents before were joined. So before we have the continents as we know them today, before continental drift took place, these organisms then may have all come or all been in a common region from a common ancestor, and as continental drift occurred, so the continents then moved away, and this is why we see that they are not all exactly the same. They are different species, but they have characteristics that are common. Okay, so that's what biogeography tells us about, gives us information on evolution. All right, then the next concept we're going to have a look at, the next form of evidence, is what we call genetics, and genetics is very important. And genetics, basically, we have a look to see how closely related organisms are. So the more genetics or genes that they have in common, or that they have the same, the closer the relationship. Okay, so that's species that are closely related. They have greater genetic similarity to each other than organisms that are not as close, so to more distant species. And therefore, they would then share a more common ancestor. Okay, so let's have a look at the diagram. One of the forms of genetics that we use, we call it mitochondrial DNA, and we know, or we've learned, that mitochondrial DNA usually is passed on by the mother. Okay, so in this little diagram here, in the first generation, we see there's the mother, and she's passed on her mitochondrial DNA to her son and her daughter. neither of them inherited any mitochondrial DNA from the father. Okay, and if we have a look then, we can see, now you see this son over here has his mother's mitochondrial DNA, but remember his offspring are going to get their DNA from their mother, the mitochondrial DNA. So we look through the maternal lineage, but here we can trace the maternal mitochondrial DNA of these offspring. They come, and we can trace it all the way back to the grandmother. Okay, so that's how we have a look, and we can see the more genetic similarities there are between organisms, the more closely they are related. All right, and then the next form of evidence that we have a look at is homologous structures, and as I said previously, homo means the same, so then they have similarities in the structures. So there are structures that are similar. So if we have a look at this diagram, here we can see this is a fin or a flipper of a whale. This is a bird, the wing of a bird, a dog, and a human. Okay, now if we have a look at the bone structure, okay, this is known as the pentadactyl limb, and if we have a look specifically, we can see the different parts, and what they've done is they've colored the parts the same. So here you can see, so these are bones, even though they have a slightly different shape, they are the same bone. All right, and here you can see it's color coding all the way. You can see all the common the bones that are same, but obviously they are different depending on the organism. All right, so basically here we have a look at, so what we can say from this is that even though all of these organisms are different, we've got a whale that lives in water, we've got a bird that lives in the air, and we have a dog that is a quadrupedal, it walks on all fours, and then we have a human, and this is a human hand. So it seems that all these organisms are very different, but what it actually shows us is that more than likely all of these organisms share a common ancestor. And we would trace back to see how much of the genetics is in common to show how closely related they are. Okay, we're going to end it here. We're going to take a short break. We'll see you back after the break.